on the motion that this House believes that international domestic development contracts that severely endanger the environment, we'd like to invite the Prime Minister.
The environment impacts all of us. A consistent environment is essential to all living beings, and we believe that selfish motives should not be allowed to harm and hurt our dear Mother Nature. Therefore, in this case, we believe that it is unjustified for international courts to invalidate domestic development contracts that severely endanger the environment. Firstly, what are international courts? WMO are legit parties that are able to invalidate contracts between countries and corporations that have a plan of domestic development to actually endanger the environment, and severely so. Firstly, what do I mean by severely endangering the environment? Severe is when people and inhibiting species or living beings cannot live in. For example, extreme air pollution in China due to their carbon emissions enable them to live in a very conducive environment because the air there is very, very polluted and therefore isn't healthy for them to live there at all. So this is the type on side of it. We want to take the stance of the development should not come at the expense of severely endangering the environment. We're not saying that development should not happen, but the fact that if your development severely endangers so many other living things, especially the environment that involves everyone on the earth on the global scale, we find that it is somewhat unjustified for you to do so. What the environment is horrible. But how is it horrible? The fact that we have severely endangered ozone layers in Australia and make everyone that sits with skin cancer is somewhat of a serious issue. So in this case, what is Interschool doing about it? Almost nothing. As so even though we have developed green technology, it is not highly encouraged or used within Interschool. So in this case, we find that development for domestic countries should not actually come at the expense of harming the environment. Firstly, how far can development go? We agree that development is important, but it should not be at the expense of the environment. For example, Brazil cutting down Amazon forests to clear them for development, China not limiting their carbon emissions due to development in the name of development, and the fact that Australia also developed until they have hurt the mother nature by having a hole in the ozone layer. The fact that development should be able to preserve and conserve the environment at the same time should something we should encourage. Firstly, why is it responsible of the international community? The fact that the environment involves everyone is something that is very essential to them, and therefore we trust them to be a neutral party because there will be no other country or body that will be able to do so without being neutral or having other evil political will. But why is it justified to intervene? This can be drawn parallel to human rights abuses. For example, if a country commits human rights abuses, it is the same thing as environmental abuses, as to where these things are legitimized to be intervened and have an intervention. And under this case, we want to draw parallel to this, as to where this is somewhere where we can intervene. Consequently, just like human rights abuses, it involves everyone. When it involves everyone on the global scale, it means that it harms everyone. And the fact that if this country has a development contract that wants to the environment at the expense of everyone else living being positioned, we find that this is totally unjustified for the country to do so, even in the name of development. So second, how does it harm the other countries and has a legitimate third party harm? As you can see, obviously in Malaysia, when Indonesia burned down their forests, we had a very, very detrimental haze within our country going. Schools were shut down, things like that happened. So in this case, we find that this can be drawn parallel to a crime concept. Firstly, it has a legit third party harm. The fact that people are suffering from your actions, not only your people, but other people from other nations also do. They are not only harming yourself, you're also harming other people. And this means this is going to be very, very abhorrent for everyone else to do so. And the fact that your selfish motive in the name of development comes to the expense of everyone living, breathing air, or the ability to live in this earth is something that we find shameful. And not only that, the irreversible effect on the environment is something that we cannot cure and something that we cannot harm. Even though status quo has carbon cap emission and carbon taxing, the fact that these things do not actually conserve, do not actually bring back to the environment as to where it was before, we find that this is something that we should be doing. It then comes to whether is it a time-sensitive thing. As much as this development is an urgency for most countries, for example, third world countries, developing nations, and some developed nations, the fact that the way the environment is degrading and the time that the environment is used to degrade is a lot more time-sensitive compared to the development you are trying to aim for. The fact that your development can be a lot slower, but the fact that you are using development in the name of making environmental degradation faster in a sense, it isn't unjustified for you to do so under this. Before that, yes.
Even developed nations previously ever environment severely in order to get where they are.
The fact that even though they did harm the environment before, the fact that they have been severely endangering the environment now, and the fact that environment now isn't the same as the environment before, this is why this policy has to take place. We recognize the impact of their past actions, and therefore we are trying to implement this policy to mitigate further harm towards the environment. And this is why we see that this is a lot more can be worked under our policy better. That is to mitigate this harm because the environment now isn't the same as the environment before. As we said, the irreversible effect of this is something that we have to consider. The fact that you cannot live in Mother Earth without the safe environment to begin with is something that is very detrimental for you and for other people. So what has the government brought to the table for you today? They brought to you that development is okay, but the fact that it's on the expense of the environment and severely harming the environment is something that we shouldn't do so. The fact that development must go with the preservation and conserve the environment because everyone else is affected, not only you. And not only that, the irreversible effect on the environment is something that we regret. The fact that our past has done it before is something that we're trying to mitigate now. This is why the government should go. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now to start the debate, opposition, leader of opposition.
Yeah. The truth that we must admit in today's debate is that every country needs to pollute the environment or needs to sacrifice the environment to some level in order to achieve development. As she couldn't answer us, there was never any nation that reached the status of development without harming the environment to a certain level. Obviously, we are not saying that we want extreme harm to the environment, but you must also admit that the environment has to be sacrificed to some level in order for us to achieve development. And development is crucial, and we think that this can work hand in hand, and we'll tell you how in all three of our speeches. Before moving on to my two substantives, let's talk about it. Number one, she wanted to characterize status quo, and she told us that status quo isn't enough, even though we have green technology, even though we have corporations today, it still isn't enough. I'll tell you why it still isn't enough. Because corporations, very rich corporations in developed countries like the US, come up with this technology and they patent the technology. They make it very expensive and not accessible for a lot of countries that are developing because they just can't afford it, because development comes at a cost and the cost has to be spent for the projects that they're running. And this is an addition and this is the extra burden that you place upon countries, and this is the Secondly, let's talk about human rights abuses, because since she wanted to parallel this to a human rights abuse. Obviously, you cannot parallel this to a human rights abuse because the intent there, you're comparing this to a dictatorial politician or a dictator who wants to intentionally harm his people, compared to this circumstance where politicians and technocrats who want to help the people and try to improve the country situation by developing the country. The intent there is two different things, and it's totally different here. Thirdly, she wanted to talk about the international spillover effect, like the Indonesia forest burning and then the spillover effect into Thailand and Malaysia. That is a severe international issue, and they faced severe international pressure after that. But they didn't remove the project; they just changed the way in which they carried out that project, because now the corporation does it in a different way, and we don't see that problem happening again. Fourthly, she talked about the idea on how it's a time-sensitive issue. But the problem here is that the duty doesn't lie within this country, the country that you want to punish for. Like you want to remove the project from this particular country, this developing country. Other countries who have the money and who have the capacity should help this country out, but not punish them instead. Because the ICJ and the international courts they are talking about are run and composed of mostly very developed and rich countries that have the capacity to develop and to help other countries out, but they choose not to. Instead, you want to punish them with by removing the projects that help these countries develop. We think it's unfair, and you have to admit that. So two certain things. Firstly, why this is principally unjustified to this country, and why this doesn't help them in any way. And secondly, the practical outcomes that will worsen the harm towards the environment at the end of the day. So firstly, why is this principally unjustified? Have a seat, madam. The first reason is that development requires some level of harm to the environment, as I already pointed out. Since the countries like the UK and the France had a lot of policies and had a lot of projects that polluted the environment in the past. That is why we have the environment is in a shithole now, and now you want to blame the country that is trying to develop itself and they couldn't develop in the past. Why? Because other countries colonized it, and other countries colonized them, and other countries took away their resources and made it harder for them to reach a state of development, and they have to cut down. They have to clear land in order to become a developed nation. Secondly, let's talk about the international courts. As I already told you, these international courts consist of prominent members of the prominent countries and prominent members that developed in the past and that polluted the environment. Now placing a burden on developing countries and punishing them for what they are trying to do and trying to develop and trying to follow the steps of these prominent countries, it is principally unfair to these countries as well. The third reason is like what the amount of resources that are in this nation, because these countries that are prominent members of the ICJ or prominent members of UN took away resources and reduced the amount of chances for countries to get where they are now. So they either give them the guidance or give them the money, but giving them development and reduce chances for them to develop. Because without this project, they lose money. Without they can get, it's harder for them to develop, it's harder for them to help the people out, like building schools, like coming up with projects that are eco-friendly, because we need money to do that as well. So you just can't start up eco-friendly projects with the little amount of money that you have now. Before moving on to my second section, yes, sir.
If you find that international bodies don't work, then tell me, why do you think that these developed nations will be then incentivized to help these developing nations in aiding for them for development?
No, I never said that the international bodies will fail. They will definitely succeed if the international court were to invalidate this project. But I am saying that it's unfair for them to do that, because they are not in any duty or they are not in any point of responsibility, because they did in the past as well. It's unfair for them to blame the country that is trying to do what they did and trying to do what they did. Yeah, trying to do what they did and trying to develop in the best way possible. The country don't intend to harm the environment, but it happens. So you are blaming them for something that is natural and something that you did in the past as well. Second, the first reason is that what's the first thing that will happen? Development becomes much slower. The only option to develop is by somehow harming the environment. So there is no other way, because other ways are very expensive and they don't have the money to do that. Now, what happens now is that these projects will fund corporations and countries tax these corporations and these projects give job opportunities to individuals on the ground. They help the society out with giving scholarships, like what Science does in Malaysia. All these things help the society and help the country in them bringing up the society as well. Secondly, what will happen now is that FBI and MNCs will move away from our country because they don't trust us anymore. Because in our country they can't function well and they lose hope in the country because now they lose the project because of this particular country. So you stop giving projects to us and they move to another country where they will will make more money because they don't do the project. Anyway, the third reason is now they are unable to combat environmental problems. Like when it comes to illegal logging, or when it comes to green technology, all these things requires a lot of money. If there is no project, there is no development, there is no money, and there is no cash flow in the country. So this makes it harder for them to develop on a long term. Obviously, on the short term, they can do it, but they require more money, and they want to develop in the most eco-friendly way possible. If you want that, and if you want to protect the environment, obviously they need money to do it, and the only way to get money is from like carrying out these projects, and existing projects will help them. For all those reasons, remember, go.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. To continue the debate, Deputy Prime Minister.
The environment is a global issue. All these domestic contracts and policies and the benefits you gain do not matter if the development comes at the expense of harming innocent lives, harming the lives of people living in other countries as well, not only your country, and making long-term harms that are irreversible to the environment in the first place. Whatever benefit that they manage to materialize with the development is irrelevant if there is no one to take the benefit from the development in the first place. Number one, they want to talk about how countries need to sacrifice the environment for development. Number one, we weren't doing a blanket policy. We told you, yes, you could still develop, but not to the extent of a severe environment pollution. The whole motion says it's supposed to be severely endangering the environment. We're not saying you can't release any carbon emissions at all. That's why you have things like carbon tax. But we think that now countries are cutting down major parts of the forest. This is an example of severely endangering the environment. This is when the policy is very necessary to take place. And also we already told you that they can't tell you that you didn't have access to green technology, which I'll later rebut in my argument. Secondly, they want to talk about how human rights abuses is different. Yes, the intent might be different, but the outcome is exactly the same. You are harming so many people because of this. That's why we drew a parallel to human rights abuses. This is when it's justified for the international court to come and intervene in this kind of situation. Secondly, we want to talk about how Indonesia has already received international backlash and they have already paid for their action. Exactly, because it's such a global issue that they are receiving international backlash. We're taking it one step further by actually taking away that contract to prevent them from using it next time. Meaning that they really very effective. And it's them because you're harming, and it's recognized that you're harming on a global scale. This is why they're being condemned internationally in the first place. They're basically conceding to our side. Secondly, they want to talk about how suddenly harder for them to develop compared to other developed countries is unfair because these developed countries have done it in the past. Number one, they were able to pollute the environment in the past because of the non-existence of green technology. Now, when you have green technology, we'll give you the example of China, which is a developing country, and they've realized that they've polluted the environment so much that they are now creating self-correcting policies which actually reduce carbon tax in this case. This is an example of a country that's developing, has released a lot of carbon, has polluted the environment. They're now taking steps to mitigate that by green technology in the first place. Thirdly, they want to talk about how you're not suddenly these developers unable to combat environmental problems in the future. If they don't pollute the environment in the first place, they won't need this money to combat environmental pollution that will happen in the future. Moving on to arguments. Look at the long-term effects of this, right? So number one, we have to recognize that the environment and all the things that people and developing countries do to the environment is a world problem. So whatever happens to someone in, for instance, USA, will happen to someone in Malaysia because the environment is global. So one hole in the ozone layer in Australia will affect everyone else in the world in terms of like heat and things like that. So we think that this is why you have a right to directly intervene in the country and the domestic policy in the country, because of the fact that it affects everyone else. Because the international community, international courts have the direct responsibility towards the international community in itself. If you harm the international community, then you have the right to intervene. Before that, yes.
So you're punishing the Indonesian company who already recognized its mistake and never did it by still removing their project.
they are still doing it through this day, and that's why you have to remove content and produce even more severe law. And we think that this severe law provides as a deterrent to any other company that actually wants to pollute the environment for the name of development. And so, moving on, right? Number one, they want to talk about how we think that now all these green policies that you create in the future will not be effective. Why? Because we have polluted the environment to an extent where it's irreversible. It's very hard for you to combat every single change and pollution to the environment. It's going to be even more expensive for you to want to do so to continue to pollute the environment at a large rate. Why would you want the money that you have gotten from development will all be spent to trying to fix the environment in the future? Why not start from now? Start using the money that could have been given to these projects for development and put it on something like green economy, investigate they can actually environment for the whole international community. So let's look at a comparison, right? Under their side, we think that people, even in the best case scenario, because of the fact that this development full of environmental pollution that is so severe in the whole world, we think that this is a harm that we are not willing to internalize just for the sake of development. We think that because yes, development will still happen, but when you severely harm the whole environment as a whole, because this development doesn't mean anything if there's no one to reap the benefits of this development in the first place. Secondly, we're going to talk about the incentive to create new green technology and things like this. So now we think that companies don't exactly have the incentive. Why? Because we think that they will always use their status as a developing country to fall backward. They will be like, oh, I'm a developing country, that's why it's legitimate for me to release more carbon. And we think that this is something that's especially harmful because it entrenches the mindset that they will never be able to develop further than that because they lack in green technology. So we think that green technology now will be more sustainable. Why? Because in the long run for the environment, we think that all the money that you use that you might have gained by these domestic contracts will be used to fund your green technology program. And this is more sustainable for the environment in the future, for the future generation, right? Secondly, we think that you're only going to begin to generate green technology as a status quo when people are already dying and when situations have been already so severe. We don't want things to go to this extent when people are already dying. You have to start from now. You have to, even if you say, we already said the status quo has a very severe situation in the environment, and we don't want it to become worse. And we think that that's what happened under that side. So let's look at a comparison and this issue. Under their side, what will happen is that now you are not going to create new green policy, and you are also going to sacrifice the time sensitivity of the environment. We already told you the importance of this. The environment is slowly dying, and when you allow the environment to die, it becomes harder for you to want to fix this problem in the future. So that's our time sensitive. And we think that now, when you have an incentive to force these countries to create better green policies and better green technology, we think that you can create a more sustainable environment for everyone. And we think that the international courts are people that should protect the whole entire world and protect them and save them from from things that will happen to the environment in the future. We have an obligation to keep the environment safe for the future generation, and that's where we are very proud to
the Chief Prime Minister to continue the debate for side opposition with the PDA.
In both scenarios, degradation of the environment exists, and we cannot prevent that. The debate is about how we prevent the eventual long-term success, and which can better prevent the environment from degrading. Because this side of the house never responds to a lot of material that came up from Nimble, everything we have to read. But I'll bring that back again to show you why it's still relevant. Two questions inside our mission because I want to concentrate. Number one, are these human rights akin to human rights abuse, akin to environmental abuse? First of all, obviously it's in the same, right? For example, we place a specific value upon human beings, so we don't place upon plants and animals. But the second most important thing is you have to understand that in Asian people are not as privileged as Malaysians. People are not privileged as like Western nations that have already been developed, where they lack education, they lack basic public transportation. Like some of the poorest people who have welfare and healthcare, they can afford that a basic human life where every single individual is served. So this side of the house must tell us on their model why they're willing to trade all these kinds of benefits offers individuals who don't get basic human access for the treatment of the environment. We think they fail to do that. So we think that protect the human being in this policy, and we can also better protect the environment. I'll explain that later in my issue. But second of all, it is global, it is dangerous, it's bad for the environment. All these two things are things that we shouldn't respond to, right? Okay, environment bad, we get it. But the thing is, why do we have to sacrifice the environment in order for development? That's the question we should ask in today's debate. Which is why we think that scrutiny already exists. England's POI was like conveniently not responded to, right? Scrutiny already exists towards nations that are already unflexible policy. Meaning, if nations are still willing to change their policy, why do they have to remove the ability for the nation to get any money at all for you to make the country a much better place in general? No answer from that side of the house. Hope they do that. But secondly, even if it is, so what? The willing trade is off in order for the developer of the nation, in order for you to ensure that more nations and these nations are able to better protect the environment in the future. We think that it's, I feel like, I'm sorry, right? Maybe your global temperature is rising, but that kid might not be able to get basic education, or that kid might not be able to get basic needs that every single human being deserves. I think on a comparison of needs, that kid wins, right? Let's look at a few things that were not responded to by from Nicholas. Number one, Nicholas told you two things. Number one, told that it's principally justified to force nations to suffer as a result of their actions. Because first of all, we have to make sacrifices, and it's very widely accepted that we are unable to progress, that we are unable to develop unless we severely harm the environment. And that's the truth, as you see, because there is no nation, and that's the answer to my POI, that has actually survived, actually severely harm the environment, because US, UK, every other country has actually severely harmed the environment to get to where they are today. So you either leave these nations in complete circumstance they are for a long period of time in order for the trade-off the environment, which you don't think is a necessary trade-off. But the second thing is we are allowed to do this in the past. I don't think that's fair, right? For example, like developed nations were allowed to pollute severely in the past, but like now developing nations at this particular point in time are suddenly not allowed to do this in the past. We think that this is unfair to do so. For example, especially when like developed nations have like no obligation whatsoever or no duty or no responsibility over the nation. Then a response was, oh no, we have green technology now, and that's why these nations are able to do that. Hello, green technology is ridiculously expensive and very inaccessible towards most developing nations which are unable to access technology, and therefore leave them in the same situation the developed nations were 100 years ago, where they still have to pollute in order to do so. But the third thing England was also not responded to was that developed nations who are mostly colonizers took away essential resources that disallowed the ability for these individuals to actually have some development and time telescope without particularly harming the environment. No response right there. What are the practical outcomes of this policy? Why are they necessarily harmful? First of all, there's very slow and almost non-existent development. There is a reason why nations would resort to severely harming the environment if not that this is the only avenue that these individuals can make some amount of money in general. Meaning there are no other alternatives except for this particular avenue if they are willing to face scrutiny to the international community in order to gain some amount of revenue. So we think that this is the only way they can do so. So the argument about these nations are still able to develop is non-existent because the amount of profit that they can gather from other sectors are virtually non-existent and very minimal in general. So they have to tell us why they're okay with giving developed nations for hundreds of years in that particular scenario where they are right now, where individuals of the lowest common denominator don't get basic human access rights that we all deserve, everything that's not fair. Then we talk about other things, right? We also told you, and England told you in speech that we turn away MNCs and FDI, well, that was supremely important to the development of Malaysia. When Sime Darby came to Malaysia, opened up opportunities, opened up plantations, Malaysians get jobs, and in some form of revenue. You open up a market for people to have accessible and for products of good quality. You open up job opportunities. States can tax all these MNCs and FDIs in order to gain some revenue. I think it's particularly important to the development of the state to make sure that the lowest common denominator does not suffer as much. But the third thing that we told you was that the eventual degradation of the environment, and we cannot avoid it. So I will tell you my speech why will eventually still protect the environment. So all the harms about, it will eventually hurt third parties will still eventually exist in the future because states right now are unable to prevent the degradation of the environment because they don't have very good laws to prevent like illegal logging, or don't have very good laws to prevent toxification of the rivers because the laws that exist right now are unable because they're not able to lobby for powerful laws against this, or secondly, they don't have the ability to pay for people to even take care of the environment. I think that's the problem that exists right now. We think the environment will eventually degrade. Yes.
We think that development will also happen, but instead in the form of green technology, where green tech companies actually can invest in these countries because now they are forced to use green technology instead of
First of all, the demand in green technologies exists within Western nations where they're able to gather more profit. There are no incentive for green technology to actually go to developing nations where the amount of profit they gather is so bigger, meaning that it's inaccessible to begin. That's not a positive method and why we are able to better the environment. First of all, through our policy, we gain better income, and that's pretty much accessible to us. We need money in order to create the land. But the real question in today's debate is why, with the money that we have, more interest in the environment in the future, and why that's necessarily benefit society. Because in both scenarios, the environment will eventually degrade. It's just that our one takes longer, but it still eventually happens, and it's still as permanent and still as damaging. The problem is, how do we then prevent it, and which side get better development and the protection of the environment? First of all, we think when we have better capacity or better ability to protect protect the environment, you have scrutiny from people and backlash from people to push you to have more stringent laws by protecting the environment. For example, when nations are becoming more developed and when China is becoming more developed, they have scrutiny from their own people and political parties. They were pro-green in order for the nation to have more lax laws. That's why carbon emissions and we have like tax exemptions for corporations that don't pollute as much in China already, meaning the society wants to develop has more of a tendency and more of an inclination to push for better laws. But secondly, the international community is not going to be as lax on you when you know that you have the capacity to take care of the environment, but still choose to omit from the responsibility of taking care of the environment. So you will have international communities like sanctioning you because you don't have like actual proper like protection to the environment. So in the future, you get better nations who are still able to develop, able to get better access to education, better access to public transportation, better access to basic food, healthcare, and welfare for those individuals. But at the same time, take some time and take some money to protect the environment, where we actually can protect the environment because the amount of money that we have right now to the environment is very little. So on this side of the house, we get to better protect the environment, but also give individuals the basic necessities and basic accessories that every human being needs globally. Never been found as well.
Now to invite the last substantive speaker for government.
They say leave the earth the way you enter the earth. We think it's unethical and unjustified for them to want to prioritize development over the environment because of several reasons that will later change. But to clear a few things, we have to understand this concept. So without the environment, and the environment not so there is deteriorating, that's really people in China can't even see the air because it's so damn black and grey that people can't even breathe properly. That is situation 54. That is why it's so important for us to go with this motion because it's the only best option for us to have a better environment, for us to have a future generation, for them to live in. We don't think that's like fitness. Let's look at this one side. But is it really a form of punishment? Because they kept talking on that. They tried to argue to you that it is a form of punishment. Because you take away their content, you take away the rich corporations that want to invest in their countries, you take away the rights for them to develop as fast as they want and for them to progress further as a developing country. Number one, the act of taking away the country itself, we don't see it as a punishment. We see it as a utilitarian benefit in the future. Why? Because when you take away this contract, that makes that pollutes the earth and makes the environment a worse place. We think when you take that away, that the act of taking away is a benefit in itself. How? Because we take away the contract that will possibly ruin the earth in itself. So why is it okay? Why is it okay? Why is it justifiable? Why is it justifiable for us to take away this contract for the countries to develop? Because we think that when you don't have this contract, you won't have people to live with. You won't have people to have houses. You won't have people just at school. You won't even have people for people for the government to pay. We think that sort of thing is very detrimental. And we think that it's conducive for the benefit to happen if they don't set the environment first. Development can always happen. People can progress and as fast as they want. But if you don't see the environment, if you don't have a place for them to breathe and live in, there's no point of having the benefit to begin with. Second, we see it's also an incentive for these countries to make better contracts for them to progress further. So we don't see it as a punishment. We see it as a form of benefit that they can make a better contract for the country to have a better contract for the environment and development in itself. That means when you invalidate this kind of development that says, no, okay guys, not this one, make a new one. A new one can be made for them to progress environment and development in itself. So it's a win-win situation. We don't see any problem in that. But then we also told you that the benefit won't happen if they don't have a place to live in. But before I move on, sure.
So if what you're saying is true, the people in UK and France have died right now. Is that what happened? Yeah.
It leads me nicely to my second point. But what is the outcome of these kind of these policies, right? Because number one, they try to argue to you that people don't put when we draw parallels and the comparison to human rights abuse, compared to this environmental abuse that they do. They say that they don't put the same price as a human to the environment. That's the problem. That's the mind that we're trying to change, because we need to unlock as a human to the environment, because it's that much valuable to the country. But secondly, they try to tell you that scrutiny doesn't happen because in Indonesia they got international judges, they got international judges, they were under scrutiny in the factory. Why? Because it still happens. We still make contracts for them to burn their trees and whatnot. Those kind of things will happen. That's why we need to take a harsh stance for them to make sure that it doesn't happen again. That's why we told you that in China, when they were trying to develop, when they were developing, and they're still developing, we tell you that China has polluted so much in the past that it's more expensive for them to make greener policies in the future now, because they try to make more carbon tax upon corporations and whatnot. Those things are more expensive than us right now trying to stop you from making content that can pollute the earth. Meaning that under their side, when you try to tell you that sure, let's go develop and we can see the environment later, that's more expensive than what we're trying to propagate to you. Meaning that the whole point of having no money for development and no money for corporations can only happen under their side. Our side provides you the steps for you for the country to develop and protect the earth at the same time. They also try to argue that this green technology is very much expensive and not a lot of countries use it because Western countries use it all the time. So first response to that is that green technology is an alternative that they use in cities and you do consider it expensive. That's why we're having this other alternative that is not expensive, that people can use, or that's very accessible to other people. We tell you that the comparison from green technology and the one that the motion that we're trying to find now is so much better and so much efficient, because all of this is not expensive. We're just trying to control the concepts that you have in order for you to not forget in the future. But secondly, they only don't need to go to West. They try to tell you that green technology is only for Western countries. Exactly, that's the problem. So when you have this kind of when you invalidate development concepts that pollute the earth, green tech corporations are incentivized to go to the country because they know that you're not doing anything back to the earth. You're trying to lessen what you did in the past or what you're going to do in the future. That's why it incentivizes them to go to your country and want to go and give more projects to the country itself. So we thought that's another benefit. When you have this type of some policies that is happening. But before six.
Yeah, so if you argue the student, why isn't the United States of America having a ridiculously hard time protecting the environment right now? Because it's so costly to get the environment right.
Exactly. That's why we need this kind of policy to be implemented now. Like for example, China in the past has been done it, and they're getting a backlash because it's more expensive for them to fix what they corrected. It's irreversible damage. You can't just say that I'll cut down 100,000 feet and apologize for that. It doesn't work like that. That's why we say the international court that you have an obligation now to go and help what we did in the past, to go and recorrect what we did in the past, even to an extent, but very minimal. We think that's the thing we want to say. But let's talk about what really goes on under our worst case scenario. The worst case scenario now is the process of countries developing, but at the expense of protecting the environment and making sure that there are people in the environment, that there are people on the earth for this development budget to get approval. Under that, the best thing that can ever happen is that countries get to develop as fast as they want, but then there's a possibility that there won't be any more people in the earth for them to get the benefit. There won't be anyone for them to give this for them to go and develop even more. So we tell you when for packages, even under our scenario, it's better because at least we're protecting the environment. We're giving countries a chance for them to develop, even if it's a minimal, even if it's a very slow step, we're willing to take that risk because we're decided what to do with the environment.
Thank you, Governor Whip. Now to conclude the substantive part, debate opposition.
the development is already a very slow process that's already ongoing. So the other side that's only exacerbating the issue, the other side is only exaggerating what the issue is. I don't think we can see a world better developed unless they risk the environment to protect the environment at the end of the day. My weekly is going to be very simple. I'm going to give you two issues which are which will be relevant in this debate. Firstly, how far can develop? I'm going to answer it is really responsibility that we need to push talk about how the environmental damages aren't really that reversible under both sides. Secondly, I'm going to talk about whether it is really, whether or not it is physically justified every day, and whether or not these countries already or not have the intent to massively or mass severely damage these or these environments. So let's move on to my first issue of the topic. How far can development go in this space? Well, they talk about how it's the responsibility of the international community to push out these environmental policies to regulate their type of development. And they told us that environmental damages are really reversible. Yes, we can see that. But to answer this question of how far can development go under their side, is to answer how severe will we go to damage the environment to develop our undeveloped countries first. Their stance from the get-go was that they would already deny any development that goes so far as to the extent that it severely damages the environment. Firstly, we have to analyze that there are still underdeveloped nations, there are still third world nations that lack basic needs, that lack basic commodities or even necessities to sustain themselves. So from the get-go, we already explained from all three speakers that this is a major important issue that we have to deal with right now, and the environment can wait a bit later. Are they the side that's willing to risk underdeveloped nations versus the preservation of the environment which can be sustained later on after we develop these developed nations? Let's give an example of the country like India, the world's most polluted country. The very sole reason they are the most polluted is because they lack the development in process. Once you are developed, only then a country has the capacity, and only then will the country have the capacity and capability to develop itself and to sustain itself and to give for its people, to cater to the wide majority of people who lack their own basic necessities. Even later on, what they have already become developed, what they already cater to most of their majority of their basic necessities. Later on, they can use the money and the income they use through development or to sustain their country, their environment. And then let's revert back and let's look what Neiman asked them, which they clearly did not respond. Neiman asked that if people under your paradigm follow these environmental policies, people in the UK or in France, which are already developed countries, what if they had followed your environmental policies from the very get-go, from the very start? They wouldn't have been enjoying their lives, they would have been having awesome lifestyles right now. But you have to understand that people in the UK, because they set their environment later on and they prioritize development first, they prioritize their development first hand. So the conclusion we can get from this is that once you risk your environment first and prioritize your development of the country, and you already cater to the needs, you already give the majority of the people in your nation the necessities and the commodities, only then you have the capacity and capability to garner and protect your environment later on. So the conclusion to this is that you have to risk something in order to protect it at the end of the day. Before that, anyone will.
If people in UK and France did our policy from the get-go, they wouldn't have to spend so much money now to try and save the environment in the first place.
No, if they had followed your policy, they wouldn't have money at all. They would have spent so much time in garnering the importance of protecting the environment rather than sustaining their development and gaining more income to sustain the environment later on at the very end. So let's go to my second issue of class. Firstly, whether it is physically justified. Let's analyze the intent of countries, because they told us that it's severely the intent of countries to severely damage their environment. We can see that nations do go overboard in some instances, which we cannot control. But that's because they don't intend to in the first place. And it's not an assumption, because nations already know that if they go to an extent as to severely damaging the environment, they will get severe backward. They are obviously developing and prioritizing their development first, and then at the end of the day, protecting their environment later. Also, how do you measure the severity of development? They still haven't asked. That's still their burden to towards at the end of the day. They said that they would face international pressure even if they change their environmental policy. But we see that they would not they still won't face international pressure because international communities risk their international development communities risk their environment first and then prioritize the environment later. So the converse is that they prioritize their development first and then they risk their environment later. So we see as there would be no more international pressure coming from those such communities because those such communities are the communities that risk their environment, that prioritize their environment first. The conclusion to this is that it is fiscally justified because if you want to sacrifice something in order to protect it later on, then you should do it either way. Let's bring up some points that were really responded from the get-go. They will ask you why it's simply just unjustified for these countries to receive such a burden or such a disproportionate punishment. He told me, which was important, is that he told you that there were countries that were colonized. There were countries who were colonized by the British, and because of the colonization, they had the inability to develop without severely damaging the environment. You see no responsibility there. Secondly, we brought you this point on how we gain income to protect the environment. They gave us the one-liner that we prioritize greedy and selfish international communities rather than protecting the environment. They have to make up their mind on whether or not on they want to protect all follow into our side. We protect the environment with money we already have because we risk the environment firsthand. So at the end of the day, we have to prioritize the development, and at the end of the day, we protect the environment.
Now to invite the reply speakers, opposition reply.
If there are crazy arguments about it being too late and all the people will die and it's too expensive, the entire British population will be dead and Western populations will not be able to serve the environmental issues. But that's untrue and it's unrealistic and we don't buy that. Because if that is true, the reality that we're living would not necessarily exist. Because the problem that faced by Western population in curbing the environmental dangers is not capacity or money. They're basically idiotic Republicans who don't believe in science. It's not about money, it's not about capacity. We can definitely do it in the future. This side of the house can tell us why they're willing to sacrifice basic commodities that third world nations still don't have the privilege to access, that education, public transportation, welfare, and healthcare, and tell us why the environment was important. And allowing these individuals to live horrible lives in deplorable conditions, they still haven't told us that until now. They told us two things and failed to do both of them. Number one, they told us that the environment harms individuals, people, and harms other people is irreversible in the first place. First of all, it's not fair. But second of all, it still happens under both sides. So in both circumstances, the degradation environment is because under your model, the money that you have will eventually be you have no ability to take care of the environment because the laws that you have will be less. The amount of money you can pay people for forest rangers, in fact, will probably not even exist anymore. People will still hunt, people will still log the jungles illegally, people will still pollute the rivers illegally. You think that degradation environment will still be eventual, whether or not which side is faster. So it still happens, it's still dangerous, it's still as permanent and damaging, but it's about whether time happens. So eventually you have short-term 2 years, 3 years, where you have very good protection for the environment, but after that you will have horrible environmental conditions where individuals don't have the ability to protect the environment, and you will also have nations that are undeveloped and not able to actually live with actual basic commodities in the first place. Second of all, it told us that it's expensive, and this is the last thing it's told us, that it's expensive to take care of the environment. That's untrue, right? Because when you have projects like this, which are very sustainable, very effective, and very profit started, these nations are more able to take care of the environment, have a higher capacity, higher ability to take care of the environment. So I don't see a reason as to why not they will not do that in the future. What did we tell you and why would they not respond? First of all, we told you that it's principally unjustified. We gave you 3 reasons as to why it's principally unjustified. We told you why it's unfair because nations who previously colonized other nations took away resources and reduced the ability for us to actually develop better as nations altogether. They did it in the past and were now able to get away scot-free. we tell you and sorry to you again, we have no response by government, is that nations have to take a decision and unable to make actual development or any significant development without making a sacrifice. They never told us why they're willing to do so. Second of all, we told you that practical outcomes are very serious and very challenging. We are very slow and almost non-existent development because there is a reason as to why they choose the most severe places to develop the nation. Meaning that no other alternative that can actually garner any significant profit that can actually help the people of that particular nation. But we're going to do other things. We're going to do the FDIs and MNCs that are actually very powerful and help a lot of nations, especially Malaysia. We can see it right now as a reason as to why people have got bad lives. And FDIs are almost always turned off when you don't have the ability to have actual projects that can garner these individual profit. Then it told us, oh no, the privilege that we have right now was green technology, and the privilege did not exist in the past. How do we resolve this issue and how do we respond to this particular point of argumentation? We told you that even if it exists, it exists towards poor nations, developing countries, because it's ridiculously expensive. Then they told us, oh no, they will leave and join the third world nation. I don't see a reason as to why a corporation will go to a third world nation when the profit is very low and marginally low as compared to going like the United States, where the demand for green technology is so high. I would rather stay in developed nations where they have better working conditions and more profit in general to win that issue as well. But the last thing that we told you is that we are also going to protect the environment in the near future, and we are also able to do that much better than this side of the house because we have an actual sustainable way to income money, an actual sustainable way to protect the environment. Then you told us, why not? Why would they actually do that? They have no incentive. Obviously, they have an incentive. That's the reason as to why Western nations that previously populated horribly are now being pushed by a lot of international communities to protect the environment. For example, have much better in protecting the environment. United States having actual growing more trees in places that are previously not existing. So this side of the house tell us why they actually are willing to sacrifice the development of nations, which is so crucial and so important for environment. They fail to do that.
Now to conclude the debate, the last speaker is Permata.
From the start, we have set this debate in status quo, where when you continuously pollute the environment, then people will die. We weren't talking about 100 years ago, and obviously Britain, people in UK haven't died yet, but the environment is slowly dying if you don't implement this policy in the first place. All that benefit of development only materialize and only mean something if there are actually people who take those benefits from development. So basically what they came up and told you suddenly, and they replied is that, oh, the West are now pushed to help these countries because of the international pressure against them. Exactly, this is what we've been talking about from the start. This is the incentive that the green technology companies have to invest because of the international scrutiny, that they have to help these people. Why would they have this incentive? We've told you. Because of the fact that all the effort to save the environment mean nothing if there are 10 countries that are continuously developing to pollute the environment. Because the environment is a world thing, all their effort won't mean anything because there is a country that's continuously polluting the environment. That means that all their effort would be meaningless anyway. So firstly, they want to talk about, we already told you how you could use, because they wanted to prioritize development, and suddenly they said that they would use that money from that development to help the environment. We don't think if it's feasible. Number one, you don't need that money to help the environment if you don't pollute the environment in the first place. Why would you need that amount of money? It will be certainly more expensive. So now to save more countries in the world, you have to combat more carbon emissions. That's why it will be more expensive. We already told you the logical link between it. And also, we have to look at the main question to be debate. How best do we help the environment in this scenario? Their solution was to pollute now and help later. But the whole reason why the environment is so bad is because people have always said that. People have always given that reason in the past. We pollute now, we can save later. This is why the environment is so bad and so shitty to begin with. So first of all, we told us that, oh, it's harder to save it because of the fact that it's irreversible. We told you that it's harder to save the environment in the future because of the fact that it's irreversible. So if it's irreversible, how can you guarantee the next percentage that of carbon that this country releases will probably be the next percentage that causes millions of people to die? You don't know how severe the environment becomes until people start dying. We're not willing to see the trade-off of that risk of people suddenly dying even at the expense of development. And also, they came up with the excuse of, oh, people cannot go to school because of the underdevelopment. Or we think that this is very extreme under that scenario. We think that not all development just comes from polluting the environment. Development comes in other forms like trade as well. And we think that this would actually help the child go to school, and we think that that's why you can save the environment. Anyway, so let's compare solutions. Our solution was to help the environment use the money that could have been used for this domestic contract to help the environment for the long run and for the sustainability. We told you that there are avenues of green technology that exist. We told you how it can come to third world countries because of their characterization of international scrutiny that can happen. We gave you so many examples of how that we can actually help the environment and benefit everyone in the long run. We told you why it's justifiable for the international community to intervene in this scenario because of the fact that the environment is a global issue. The environment can harm every single one of us sitting in this room because some person in India decided to pollute the country as a whole. We wanted to give you the example of India and how India is so polluted and people are so polluted. But this is actually an example of how development and pollution don't go hand in hand. Because of the fact that even if India is polluting, they still are poor. They still are poor to begin with. This means that even if you develop with pollution, it doesn't guarantee the fact that all your benefits are going to materialize. This is why the trade-off is justifiable. This is why we have won this debate.